Hello everybody, my name is Minna Tarkka, I'm director of MCult and I'm really happy to welcome you in the last session of MoneyLab number 9 in Helsinki. Looking forward to hearing the talks, the final talk, after 2 days of really intensive discussions. And MoneyLab is in Helsinki is co-produced with Economic Space Agency and Robin Hood Cooperative, Institute of Network Cultures, and then the fabulous Order Library, where we have been spending these days.
Hey, my name is Ida. I'm producer at MCult. So yeah, today's session, the last session of this series, is called Experiments in Governance, and the session is happening with Ella Kagel from Supermarkt, Nathan Schneider from University of Colorado Boulder, and Primavera de Filippi from MetaGov, as well as with Colin Drumm from Study Garden. And the host is Pekko Koskinen from Economic Space Agency. The session will be 2 hours long, and the last 30 minutes will be for open discussion from the audience, for the audience questions also from the chat, and so forth. So there will be open mic or open discussion in the end. So yes, maybe I will introduce the host a little bit. Pekko Koskinen is a game designer, artist and developer specialized in gamification of social conventions and utopian and fictional ways of living. Currently he coordinates ESCA, a lab at Economic Space Agency, developing a platform for programmable economy and organization. So thank you.
Yeah, those are the questions. Will be also, you can make them over chat, which is on the MoneyLab 9 front page. Thank you.
All right, let's get this thing, not a party, but whatever it is, let's get it started. So a couple of rules at the beginning. First of all, I'll address the topic. Now, experiments in governance, I would first highlight the concept of governance here, and I would say that the meaning of governance can be taken by anybody who is speaking, but also anybody who's listening, as freely as one wants. Like, I think it's a concept that hides underneath many, many topics. For example, it could be the concept of organization. In this case, it could be many other concepts. But what it tries to open up is this question of our social rules, conventions, and practices, and the bodies they form. And with this comment, I'm also giving all the speakers the freedom of not necessarily tying, although they can, to the history of governance as a concept, but really like looking at this larger area underneath it and experiments with that, given the title. Second rule, we'll try to make this conversational. Let's see if I manage. If I talk too much, I give everyone here a right to organize this session. I give you the right to interrupt me. You can also make me questions. Of course, you probably thought that you can make me questions anyway, but it's like highlight pen when I give you this right to making questions, so it maybe becomes more apparent. But I try to be the least in voice ultimately when we get to this, and hopefully I'm something that helps the conversation along and takes part on it in a moderate fashion, not too much. You can hold me to that. Then, secondly, like, as it is a conversation, you can also make questions for everybody else than me. Like in the panel, you can talk to each other. So we can have this sort of a virtual simulation of a table if needed be. And that's something I would encourage as well. Like if a question comes to mind, it's also your right, not mine. And finally, I will do the meta and ask any questions so far before we hit the engage button. No questions. It's good or bad sign, who knows. So the first question I would do to each of you is the same question, and I start with Ella because you're first on the list, no other reason. Sorry, it's just like a matter of choice. And that question is, how would you introduce yourself?
I was afraid of that question.
I know,
oh
I know.
My God.
I'm sorry. Like it just happens.
Oh my
this
God.
kind of.
You know, I'm usually really bad in presenting myself and adhering to regular job profiles. So, okay, I'll give it a try. Okay, maybe I can start with. I'm here in Berlin, in Kreuzberg. I'm at Supermarkt. Supermarkt is a physical space. It's a community space in Berlin that is open to people that explore alternative economies, digital culture, governance, and money. We will host the MoneyLab next year in March. Really looking forward to that. And I have a huge interest in governance. I have a big interest in ways of, within groups of people, finding regulations, finding agreement on how to use the space together, how to make space together so everyone feels well, and to ensure that everybody can be productive, that interesting stuff can happen, that collaboration can happen. So in that sense, I'm maybe a weird combination of community builder and facilitator and non-academic researcher and communicator, and maybe something in between these worlds. Yeah, I guess that's me.
That's a good answer to this annoying but useful question. Like sometimes annoying questions are useful. The same question for Primavera. How would you introduce yourself? You're muted, by the way. Primavera, can you hear me? All right, if there is technical problems, no.
Sorry, yeah, I have problems with my headphones, but you should be able to hear me now?
Yeah, now we hear you.
Yeah, okay. So I'm mostly a researcher from CNRS and Harvard, and I'm focusing essentially on the legal aspect of blockchain technology with a big focus on the question of governance. So to which extent can blockchain technology actually qualify as a mechanism that can enable more distributed and participatory governance? And on the other side, like what is the governance of blockchain technology, and how can we actually design a particular governance structure that will ensure that the technological guarantees of the technology are actually applicable?
Good. Another good answer. So, and finally, unless Nathan gets here, then we'll visit this question again. But now, Colin, how would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Colin Drumm. I'm a PhD candidate at UC Santa Cruz in the History of Consciousness department. My academic work, I'm a monetary historian. I write about history of coinage, kind of from ancient Mediterranean into early modern Europe, and I write about political struggles over the monetary system. So I'm interested in the problem of monetary policy as a constitutional problem in the development of states, and as a distributional problem, as a problem of class struggle. And I guess kind of more germane to our topics here, I have been exploring, basically doing online teaching outside the university. So I'm interested in exploring the way that we can kind of do intellectual research and teaching at a kind of graduate study level outside of kind of this rapidly crumbling university system, which is not really meeting the needs of the people that it's supposed to be serving. So I might be talking a little bit about that project as we go forward.
Yeah, actually, I think it probably would be useful to kind of insert next something about each of your projects, because for the audience that gives some grist in the mill that they can process you and then the later answers. So hence my question is, if the title is Experiments in Governance, and you can take like very much freedom in both the word experiments and in the word governance, how would you describe something that you're doing right now or have been doing that you find interesting in your own actions towards experiments in governance? And anybody can start. I think I'm trying to mix the order because order makes things too rigid. So anybody can start, but it's a question for everyone.
I can go.
Go ahead, Colin. Yeah.
So a project that I've kind of been working on, we're sort of in the initial stages of thinking this through, is a project that we're calling Study Garden. Kind of the impetus for this project has kind of came out of my experiences last year, where we had a graduate student strike at UC Santa Cruz. So maybe some of you have heard about this in the news. Basically Santa Cruz is a place where a 1-bedroom apartment costs $2,100 a month, something like that, which is well below the stipends that they give graduate students. So the problem is that the university is this institution that is supposed to promote teaching and research. The main physical input into that production process is just people. We're talking about the humanities. We don't need labs. We really just need time and office space and a library, and those things don't cost very much. And the main input is just our lives, our bodies. And but it's clear that the university is not interested in paying the minimum necessary price to sustain that basic material input into its product. Mm-hmm. And so I had this experience of going on strike with the grad students in the last year, and I was I was teaching a class, and at the same time I was doing freelance teaching online, right? So I have a following of people on social media who are interested in my work, and I've been running a seminar with these people where we meet once a month, and I assign a stack of books, and we discuss it, and they pay me. And just thinking about the economics of this, of these two situations, on the one hand, the students are paying to be in my classroom, which is a ton of work for me at UC Santa Cruz, and poverty wages. And at the other hand, I'm doing this thing online, and it costs them way less. And the product that they get is actually better because it is unalienated. I have in doing the freelance stuff, I have total freedom to teach whatever I want, as opposed to, the kind of the content in these big lecture courses is low quality to non-existent sometimes at the university, and so the question is, how do you put these resources together? You have people who want to learn, who have some money, you have people who need to make some money by teaching, and the problem is that you've got this middleman, the university, that's standing in there, taking a huge cut out of everything and degrading the quality of it and controlling everybody. And the main obstacle that they have towards somebody really, shorting this trade is sort of the monopoly of accreditation, right? Because the one thing that I can't do, the only thing that I really need them to do is to certify, to give sort of this stamp of approval over what we did. And so this kind of got me to thinking, what if, is there a way to break the monopoly of the university on the credit system? And could we do this by rethinking the paradigm of how we think about what a university credit is, to change it from a gatekeeper economy to a garden economy, as we call it, right? So the university, the way that it works is, first they say, we are going to stamp you, we're going to approve that you have something worth teaching, and then we're going to let you do it, right? So evaluating the quality of it happens first, and that is what lets you in to be able to do your teaching. But this is also the process that reinforces orthodoxies, that allows cliques to dominate fields and things like this. So the question that I've been asking is, what if you could create a zero barrier to entry economy for academia, such that anybody could start teaching, as long as you can find students who are willing to pay you at whatever price you think your time is worth, and issue them credits that would then be retroactively evaluated based on the success of the people who hold the credits, right? So basically, so for example, right, so I teach my seminar and nobody knows yet whether it's good, but we don't have to. If all we do is if we have a token, some kind of representation, a digital object that represents the event, if my students who are in that seminar go on to do well according to whatever metrics the system has, then it would say, yeah, that was a good credit. You know, so you know, the basic idea is, what if you could short this market, cut out the middleman of the university, of the institution, get money in the hands of people who need to sustain their life to do research, by selling it directly to their audience. And if you can solve this credit problem, if you can solve the problem of issuing credits now and evaluating them later, then you can remove the barriers to entry into that process, and hopefully, you know, open up space for some more creative intellectual work. So that's sort of the basic idea I'll lay on the table and let somebody else speak for a moment.
Super interesting. Yeah, I have been working along similar lines, and you know, so a lot of what you were talking about resonates with me, because you know, it's a little bit what you're describing is this reverse engineering, but also reimagining, creating access, and yeah, thinking of different ways of how to create access to economies or to build our own economies. So I have been thinking a lot along those lines as well, especially in the field of organizational design. And one of the projects I'm working on here with Supermarkt in Berlin, together with many other players in the field, is related to a movement that's called platform cooperativism. And it's basically the idea of creating alternatives to the market monopolies of the digital platform economy. So just want to give an example what that concretely means. We all know Airbnb, but there is a really interesting alternative emerging these days. It's called Fairbnb. And it's basically, it's the same kind of business model. It's a digital business model. It enables people to rent out their apartment short term, but it's organized as a cooperative, and there's also local shareholders involved, such as the city administration and so forth. So altogether, the board and the members take care of really building a resource that is sustainable and that doesn't change rent prices and so forth. That's just, you know, that's, let's say, compliant to community standards and to what makes sense for local communities. So I've been working a lot with emerging platform co-ops that we have a number of here in Berlin, luckily. Super interesting scene of founders in that field. And in order to build organizations like that, I think we are really called to reimagine how economic institutions and organizations can work these days, and how we need to rebuild them or to reimagine them. Because especially when I look into our German legal frameworks around cooperatives, it's really difficult to engage in transnational decision-making, for instance, because as very often is physical appearance is required in order to sign and so forth. But then also, you know, there's just one currency involved. But what about involving cryptocurrencies, tokens, and so forth? You know, many other things. And around this work of platform co-ops and creating in various forms of organization design, I also work on very specific projects, such as the Circles UBI, which is a basic income project, and I'm helping them currently to found a cooperative, which is really interesting because that's adding an organizational form to the token. So that's basically what I do. And in engaging with these projects, I just like, yeah, almost every day I realize how complex the field is and how much it is that we need to acquire in terms of tools and communication skills, but also in imagination skills in order to get rid of a lot of the systemic knowledge that at least I brought with me when starting Supermarkt. Yeah, guess that's it. You're muted, Pekko.
Am I muted? Oh, can you hear me? Okay, good. Always, there's 2 mute buttons. Gets too complicated. Anyway, so yeah, one interesting notion from both of your projects is that, like, how the topic of governance comes in so many levels. Like to use Colin's case as an example, like there is the kind of governance and organization really of the garden itself, the study garden. But then there is the question of the organization of maybe creating structures and networks in between study garden and other similar projects. And finally, of course, the whole project itself is almost like a challenge of governance towards the traditional cardinal of the accreditation and that system, which is a stake on organization in this world. And similar topics come, like in Ella's case, like the circle, building this organization in itself, having a network system on top of it, etc., which is it's a quality how one has to work on many levels when it comes to a question of governance and organization. Anyway, Primavera, how would you describe your experiments in governance if you're completely free to define those concepts as you may? You're muted.
Yeah, that's right. So I think to my vision, like my own attitude, at least my own research about governance, is really to try and understand the extent to which we can shift from the, like right now we have 2 mainstream model of governance, the more traditional organizational hierarchical governance structure, where you have like different models, but it's some people deciding for other people how to do things, and it has a very important element because it's very good for like alignment, right? Like, so there is a particular value system that belongs to an organization, and of course the people at the top of the hierarchy are the ones that are ensuring the alignment of the organization. On the other side, there is like the more market-based governance, which is actually interesting in the sense that it's actually more decentralized and more distributed, but at the same time, it's very easy to co-opt the value system, and it's very easy to develop it into like some, even though it starts in a decentralized manner, it can easily evolve into a more and more concentrated, and like there is these oligopolistic dynamics that emerge unless there is some type of intervention. And so what I'm really interested in, and I think there is like 2 fronts in which I'm trying to tackle the governance question. One is really like, so the work with that started early on with Backfeed in 2015, and then that evolved slowly into different projects, and eventually materialize itself with like DAOstack, which is trying to figure out how can we actually get the best of both worlds, meaning that how can we actually benefit from the scalability and from the emergent approach of a market-based system while using that system at the service of an organization and maintaining the inherent value system of the organization prevailing over the possible co-optation by market dynamics. So that's one part. And then the other part is more about like the MetaGov project. And here the idea is that if we look at the situation on the internet, most platforms actually do not come with a specific governance structure, except like the person that controls the platform actually decides everything. So there is, it takes a lot of effort to actually implement a mechanism that enable the user to be more involved in the governance of a particular platform. So the idea that we're trying to do with MetaGov is actually designing some type of governance protocol. So in the same way in which today we have, you know, like the web and the HTTP protocol that enable web apps to communicate with each other. As long as they follow the same protocol, they are interoperable, and you can create applications that are relying on the APIs of other applications and so forth. So you can create like sophisticated applications that rely on multiple services that are aggregated or that are combined together. And the problem is that today we don't have something like this about governance, in the sense that every platform is its own silo in terms of the way in which privilege and decision-making is made. And it's difficult to rely on one third-party platform in order to manage the governance on another platform. So as an example, let's say that we are a community on a virtual world, or like some online gaming platform, and we want to have a governance structure. And of course, the game platform is not providing a particular governance system that we actually are looking for, but we might want to rely on a third-party system, whether it's like Lumio, whether it's like a blockchain-based system, and so forth. And the problem is that today it is possible to do so, but the decisions that are made in this platform will not be inherently and automatically implemented into the other platform. So what we're trying to design is like, how will the governance protocol look like, so that we can actually intersect multiple platforms, and each one of those platforms actually contribute to creating a global governance platform for online communities that can decide to combine different modules and different pieces, like whether it's about the assignment of power, whether it's about the decision-making, the deliberation, and just plugging all those things together in order to actually have a full and comprehensive governance system that does not need to only depend on one single platform, but that provides this interoperability at the governance level, so that one decision made in one platform is also automatically implemented in another platform.
And it's also like interesting the relation between organization and platforms, which you were kind of describing, and the kind of which is also necessary. I mean, there was this period of where the phrase "code is law" was quite present in blockchain circles, which is sort of naive in a way, like, because if code would be law, then whoever decides upon the code governs. So, and this kind of points out how there's always a layer of governance. Whatever system you create as a platform will inescapably form some kind of governance around it, whatever it is, even if it's no governance or free. That is a form of governance in itself. So, like, it's an area where I think we as humans, everybody, are learning the nature of platforms as social structures and what they mean for organizations. Now, as to kind of harvest your brain power, which is more expansive than mine, especially at least if we combine all of us together, I thought to ask you, is there a question you would like to ask from others, which can be from everybody or a particular person? I can and will give you the floor to ask that question. Anybody can make the question.
Yeah, maybe I can ask a question to Colin. I was quite intrigued by the approach of making everyone who feels like a teacher. Yeah, so that's what I understood, right? So you can, so I could apply for being a teacher, and I could offer whatever. So what do you think, given that approach, what actually happens in form of knowledge transfer and interaction between people if they engage in such a project? What are the benefits of it?
For the students who are like, what's the value proposition? Yeah, well, you know, I mean, one thing that I've been thinking. So the way that we think about education, both culturally and I think more importantly financially, is that we think about education as a form of capital investment, and that's why people take on debt in order to get it, right? I mean, so when you are investing in education, you're making a levered play on a capital investment. You're hoping that you'll be able to borrow money and harvest the premium for your college degree and your income. And so we think about it like a capital asset, right? And I think this is the origin of a lot of the dysfunction in the system. I mean, not least of all because it's really not a capital asset; it's a positional good. It's not really so much that what you learn in university produces something. It distinguishes you from other people. So you know, what we produce is a grade, and we produce a ranking of people, and if you have everybody competing to borrow money to make a levered play on a positional good, what you're going to produce is price inflation, you know? And so that's why we've, you know, the cost of education is spiraling upwards for the student at the same time as the actual money that you get paid for producing this product goes down and down. And what I've been thinking is, you know, we really should treat education just like an entertainment good, you know? I mean, because like the way the economics of it work out, I mean, you know, I have a seminar with 15 students in it, and I charge them all $35 a session to come. That's plenty of money, you know. It's as much money as I would make at the university. And for the students, for each session, I mean, it's a 2-hour session. We have a conversation. I mean, they get a big list of books. I mean, it costs less than going to the movies and buying a drink and popcorn, you know? I mean, it's just a fun thing to do. And so in a way, I think we really need to think about education as a consumption good, just as something that you pay for and you enjoy it and you consume it, and that's gone, right? And it seems kind of scandalous because we're used to thinking about it as an investment good, but it's not that expensive. It doesn't waste real resources, you know? I mean, it's just, you just sit down and so it's just a question of cultivating a market of people who are willing to think about education in that way, and who are willing to, you know, and I mean, I guess the problem that this raises is the question of discipline, right? You know, I mean, I think we all know, you know, one of the purposes of the university is just to discipline people for the pure sake of disciplining people, which is kind of sadistic. You know, on the other hand, sitting down to read some difficult books requires discipline, you know? And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge is if you reframe education as a consumption good, where does the discipline come from? But I mean, it's not like this sort of carceral punitive university actually produces subjects who sit down and read books either, you know? So it's the same, the problem cuts both ways. I mean, there's all of this discipline in the university, but not much of it is getting put into the purpose of, I don't know, sit down and read Plato, which is what I think discipline's good for.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I think also ideally knowledge institutions also help cultivating the social space for learning and for, you know, for creating a specific culture where knowledge transfer can actually happen. And I think this cultural component and social skills that also, that come along with that, that's also something that I would maybe add to the discipline part, because ideally that's what a university can provide as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's carrots are better than sticks, right? I mean, if you like disciplining, you know, as I think Plato says in the Mena at some point, or in Republic, you know, I mean, he says this point, you know, you can't learn anything in a servile manner, right? I mean, if you're trying to learn just because you're obeying orders, I mean, you're not really gonna learn very much. So certainly, I mean, you need to create a culture in which learning is really is pursued. I don't know, because you want to display it. So one thing that I've been thinking as I am pondering the structure of this kind of study garden economy that I'm trying to imagine. One incentive structure that I've been playing around with is the idea that so on the one hand, if you take a class and you get a credit, the system might be able to evaluate what the worth of that credit is in academic terms. But also what I've discovered in doing and trying to cultivate kind of my seminar is that I have a core group of people who want to show up and take the seminar, right? I mean, they'll read hundreds of pages a month. They'll show up for the 2-hour conversation, like they're there. And that creates the content. But there's a larger group of people who are interested in what's happening, who aren't up for that, right? Who can't do the reading, don't know how to participate in a seminar. They don't know how to read and come with questions ready to discuss. So even if they do come, they don't say anything. So there's a bigger group of people who are interested in what's happening. And what I've been trying to think about is if those people are willing to subscribe, right? So I have some people who subscribe to me, $7 a month. They subscribe on Patreon just because they like the content, right? So you have some people who want to audit the seminar. They want to kind of participate in a more hands-off fashion, and they might be willing to pay money. What I've been thinking about is if what is issued to the students, so the people who read the book show up, they're content creators also. I mean, it's their conversation that is what other people are watching. So in addition to having the credit be evaluated academically, it could also be a revenue stream, right? So basically, if you are in a seminar that is successful, you would get a token that said you helped create that seminar. And if the seminar is like up on a website where people could interact with it indefinitely, going into the future, if that generated revenue, so like if that seminar generated a lot of interest, that would create a pot of money that could be split among the people who participated in it, right? So this would give everybody an incentive to like do the reading, be interesting, because if you come to class and you create something interesting together, you potentially all have an equity stake in the revenue stream that would be thrown off by that content. So that's kind of the to kind of create a monetary incentive to do your homework and come to class ready to discuss. I mean, if everybody's boring, then it won't work, but if it's interesting and it creates something that people want to engage with for years afterwards, that is a potentially interesting model to think about. How do you create structures? How do you make the platform incentivize the kind of culture that you want? And so a big problem that we've been running into, and I don't think I have an answer to this yet, is sort of like, how do you disincentivize clickbait kind of stuff, right? Because it's supposed to be it's supposed to be replacing academia, right? So we don't want everything that's bad about Twitter to be replicated on this platform, right? So there's this whole question of like, how do you make structures that cultivate cultures, to speak redundantly.
But that's actually like one interesting quality in this topic of academia as organizational design is that there is always this meta topic in it that like academia, university has always been an operator of organizing of knowledge. The production of science or presence of science, which in itself is an organized output, like it's text, but it's in a field, it's produced by a protocol of peer review, etc., etc. That in itself is an organizational question that is necessary for even science to exist. And then university or academia or anything like that is a question of how do we organize out knowledge, not all knowledge, of course, what we have, but a certain kind of knowledge which connects to science and other things. So in this sense, like it's a very crucial organizational creation of human culture, like to an organizational operator, the university. Any other questions between from anybody to anybody? So I'll take the reins. I have a question which so there's been a kind of a thematic that in this MoneyLab stemming from this playground, which is kind of getting your hands dirty in economic design, etc. It's been at least among the workshops, and so I wanted to kind of introduce a bit that element to this, and hence I ask you the question is like, when you have to conceive and design or create, use whatever word, something organizational, how do you do it? How do you think about it? How do you express it to you, to others? What is the process? And what kind of things you think would be worthwhile telling about your process in terms of creating and conceiving organization? And this is for everybody.
Well, Pekko, that's a super big one. But okay, maybe, you know.
But you do it somehow, like.
Yeah.
So what happens?
Of course, yeah. But you know, I'm just thinking, because I'm really interested in the question, but I'm just thinking whether I have any specific protocol for it, because it seems that I'm, you know, with each project we are starting all over again. Mm-hmm. But there is one useful thing, and I keep coming back to it, and it's a little bit from the Theory U framework. And mm-hmm. Theory U is a methodology, a framework methodology that allows systems to transition into new stages.
Yeah.
So for me, a good starting point is to allow the system to see itself. That's what Theory U says, to get an understanding of what is, you know. It sounds really simple, but I realize very often when people come together that those 5, 6, 7, 10 people in the room, they each have a really different understanding of what they're about to engage with or to embark on. So it's really interesting to sort of try to get an understanding of what it actually, what the system actually is, and what it wants to do, and whether there's a shared vision or not. So this is one thing I try to understand. So just to have an idea of who are the agents within the organization and what needs to be organized at all. Because sometimes there is a specific calling for things to be organized that are maybe only secondary, because there might be other things far more important, but you don't see it from the outset. Maybe it's people being in fear of admitting that the topic they're working on is too complex, and they just don't have the words to describe that they are maybe overwhelmed and they need clarity. But this is something that I realize often, that especially in fields where complexity really gets together, like organizational design, but also crypto projects, there's a lot of complexity, and then there are different levels of understanding, and it's super difficult to leverage the knowledge and understanding in the room, make sure who has the knowledge, who can pass on the knowledge. It's just this general assessment of who is here, what is it that everyone wants to do, and what needs to be organized. And then there's another component I want to share, and I keep coming back to that as well. And that is, how to call it. It goes back a little bit to what you said before with the code is law thing. I realize more and more that communities, it's always useful to have some sort of code of conduct, right? Which is an ongoing thing that communities really continue to work on as long as they are together. It's not a static thing that once it's set, it just stays there, but it's something that is ongoing. And it's a constant negotiation of, you know, how people want to be together in the space and what makes the space productive and safe for them. And that's also something that you cannot underestimate in organizational design, because a lot of the flaws of organization keep coming back to a lack of consent on these very basic social norms. And yeah, I see a lot of weight being put on that, especially in emerging projects, and I like that. I think that's a good direction. But these are maybe the things I would try to consider in the beginning, to just reduce complexity a little bit and to get a better understanding of, yeah, what is it that we are actually governing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Key question. What about others? Colin, Primavera? How do you see or conceive organization of any kind when you're having to create it or wanting to create it even?
Well, I think I would answer this question more as wearing my historian hat. I don't know that I'm an expert on creating organizations.
I don't think there are too many of those, actually.
But I guess speaking as a historian who's interested in the organization of the state and the monetary system, right? I mean, this is what I've been trying to think through, and a lot of people have kind of there's a tendency in a lot of our discourse about this topic to imagine very like simplistic kinds of systems. I mean, systems which are like characterized by two sides only, right? I mean, there's sort of like there's a sum, you know. I mean, so we think about it just in terms of like summing things up, right? I mean, like, so you might think about, for example, you know, if the government spends money, then it's like taking money away from somebody else, or something like that, right? So there's all of this thinking in terms of like zero sum accounting identities, and in trying to maybe sort of like better understand this kind of organizational structure, what I try to do, I mean, my slogan with this is follow the flow of funds. And what that means, so basically in accounting, there's two different, there's basically like balance sheet accounting, and then there's flow of funds accounting, and there are two different ways to think about accounts. And in flow of funds accounting, you follow the money as it goes around, right? It makes a loop, right? So rather than just thinking about how balance sheets sum, instead you want to think about, you know, to literally follow the money as it goes through, you know, in each transaction, right? And so like keeping your eye on the way that resources and money as like real physical things flow through the system, through the organization, as opposed to, as a lot of like traditional political economy does, abstracting away from the literalness of the things that are circulating and thinking instead about like value or some kind of abstract substance. Or so I guess like making sure not to collapse heterogeneous particulars under like an abstraction, and really to think about how resources flow, because the flow has to make a loop. You know, I mean, if everything has to eventually loop back to where it started, or else something will be accumulating. And if something is accumulating somewhere in the system, that's where the system tends to break, right? So I guess like to follow the flow of funds and try to make sure everything, make sure the circuit is working correctly. So
I can attest to that method, like following the flow of funds. It's something like, especially when I was more present in art world, it's very illuminating often. It's a kind of perspective that usually benefits you, and it doesn't give you everything, but it's kind of like a certain understanding can come from if you just follow the flow of funds. And it's not too hard. I mean, like it's not something that you can do it even if you're not an economist and so on. But now, Nathan, welcome. You're in an appropriate time. There is still time to include you in the process. So let's do that. Can you hear me first?
Yes, and I'm very sorry. I screwed up. I have to make breakfast for kids, so I can't really participate. I messed up the time on my calendar. Really
okay.
Sorry.
So you get. So in terms of you cannot participate, it means like I should not do questions for you, or. Can you hear me?
That's Pekko. Nathan wrote in the chat that he cannot really participate, but he would rather listen.
Okay, yeah.
So I guess, yeah, probably not asking questions.
All right. So then I won't. So, okay. So, but then that returns us to the point where we were, which is this question: how do you conceive organization which is still left for Primavera? So, how do you do it, Primavera? We cannot hear you, Primavera, right now. Like, you're not muted, but there is no sound. Yeah, still no sound. Can anybody else hear Primavera? Yeah, so there's no sound for anyone. Yeah, now it's muted, but it wasn't.
Right now.
Can you hear me? Well, if, now you're muted.
Hello? Can you hear?
Yeah, it's quite quiet, but now we can hear.
Can you hear?
Yeah, it's. Can you raise the volume? Is there any chance of getting the volume up?
I think that's all I can do.
Okay, yeah. Can you speak a bit more? Like, just trying.
Yes, anyway. So I'm just going to speak and you stop me if you cannot hear anything. So to me, like, there is two facets to that. And I think in the early days, I was very eager to try and find out how, mostly blockchain technologies could actually help us design whole new types of organizations with like more distributed and participatory governance and so forth. And I think that now I'm still very keen on trying to figure this out, but I also realize that it's extremely complex because the more distributed the governance becomes, then the more risk there are that the actual organization gets co-opted by market dynamics or invisible powers and so forth. So to some extent, like I started shifting a little bit and looking more about, given the existing organizations and the existing institutions, to which extent can we actually help them? I wouldn't even say transition. I would just say, like, how do we help them move into like a more more transparency, more accountability, more confidence? Like, how do we help them become more trusted? And so it's my research has a little bit moved away from trying to create those very decentralized autonomous organizations and so forth, and more into what kind of technological guarantees can we incorporate into those existing institutions, public or private institutions, in order to actually increase the confidence and the predictability and the accountability in the way in which they operate, so as to help people actually restore trust in those institutions, in the sense that today it's very difficult to actually trust existing institutions because we actually have to trust 100% of what they're doing. And of course, there is like some layers of regulation and oversight and so forth that are added on top, because we want to make sure that they actually act in our interest. But what I'm very interested in is actually whether by injecting some technological guarantees directly into the information system of those organizations, then perhaps because we're increasing the degree of confidence in those systems, then we only have to trust them that much. And we only have to trust them to the extent that, like, whatever cannot be codified into technological guarantees is the part that needs to be trusted, but it's much smaller than if there were no technological guarantees at all. And so in some way, like right now, I think my main focus is this. And possibly after we figure this out, then maybe we also have better tools to think about how we can create fully decentralized organizations. But to me, like the urgency is actually how do we make sure that the organization and the institution that we have today can be improved in terms of their governance, in terms of their transparency, and in terms of their participatory dynamics and so forth. So yeah, so I think like to me, like technology can do both, but it's so difficult to actually figure out the right governance structure for fully decentralized organization that I almost think it's easier to focus first on the incremental improvement on existing institutions and then move on to the decentralized ones.
Good. Actually, that is a good lead-in for the next question, which is also for everybody. I think it's been maybe interesting to hear these different reflections on the same topic. So what I wanted to ask you is, from your perspective, your practical perspective of working in the experiments in governance, or at least something towards that direction, what do you think we're missing as a culture? Are we missing learning? Are we missing literacy? Are we missing tools? I mean, it of course could be all of them, but what would you highlight of what we are what should we have and what should we develop as a culture to go forward in the directions of our organization you're pursuing? Anybody can answer.
Yeah, maybe I can start. Just getting just giving in a few examples, and then the others can join in, because you know, just listening to your question, I realized there's so much that I have the feeling at least I need to unlearn in order to feel capable of facilitating such huge transition processes, because that's how I see that, right? So building and envisioning new organizations, working on, you know, different models of education or fully decentralized organizations. This really requires to let go of so many beliefs, convictions, knowledge, social protocols. I think is quite enormous, right? So. So really, unlearning to me is maybe just a name, but a few. Unlearning, or maybe a better understanding of where hierarchy is good,
yeah,
and where it is good to let go of hierarchy, and to you know, to remember practices of cooperation and collaboration that humans used in the past, that have been widespread. Maybe remember that, and thinking of ways to you know, to reacquire those skills. This is something. Also, maybe understanding centralization and decentralization, and also, you know, because that's also something I really miss in this entire debate, because centralization as such in and of itself is not good or bad. It's just really understanding better where the context of where it might make sense and where it doesn't, what the actual benefits are. This is something. Also, I think, you know, another, I wouldn't even call it skill. I think this is rather a systemic view, or it's a systems condition, and that's basically that's prevailing views on how economy works, that very often neglect specific aspects of care work or invisible labor. So a lot of the current research body on economy is, in my understanding, is outdated and doesn't work anymore. Doesn't help us much to really advance and to tackle further future challenges. To helping to facilitate a society that really badly wants to transition and wants to change on so many different levels, be it integration of people migrating, be it gender equality, be it I don't know. I don't even know where to start naming these things. But yeah, just to open a discussion, I can't possibly point out everything that needs to be considered, right? But just maybe just a few of them at the top of my head that I run into quite often.
Yeah, I mean, nobody can point out everything, but I think those were good points. For example, the sort of centralization, decentralization, distributed, it is a topic that really needs, let's say, a more sophisticated process there. Like, it's certainly not good and bad, but there's also structures that are distributed, like the web, for example, can actually in practice start to behave or even have a tendency to become re-centralized. So the practice can become the centralizing factor, even if the system is distributed. And even actually that topic itself, like thinking about organization or having an analytic both structurally, like what is the form of organization and what is the practice of organization and what qualities those two fields or perspectives bring is something that is also, like, from my side, come up listening to your comments. But what about Colin or Primavera? What do you think we're missing? You're muted, Colin. I can see you but not hear you.
Oh, Nathan is saying in the chat that he has a comment to make, so maybe we can let him.
Oh, yeah. Then Nathan, you can go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll try to do this over cooking to talk about some invisible labor, but mainly stupidity. But I'm not allowed to say stupid.
I mean, you're bringing extra guests, like who everybody likes extra guests, so you get points for that. Yeah.
I love how Ayla started that with both the acts of unlearning and also remembering. I think just over and over of kind of the contrast between organizations that are very familiar, so familiar that we kind of forget about them. At the same time, I've been working on a lot of this governance stuff. For instance, my mother is part of a neighborhood organization that she has, been part of an election for. And I just constantly, it's a constant reminder that we're building on legacies that, so one goal I set out for myself in building these tools is how could we just replicate what her group is doing online? And right now our tools don't do that. It draws a really harsh contrast for me of like what kinds of practices just kind of have been built up over a great deal of time, and what how far we have to go just to remember those participatory capacities and gain the ability to practice them in our online communities as well. So there's just this recuperation, and then at the same time, people tend to think of either democracy or in politics or online community governance as this kind of fixed thing. Like, yes, of course there are mods. Yes, of course there are admins of dictatorial power over our voice, and we don't question that, just as we don't question that liberal political institutions must be defended, and we don't entertain the question that I think is much more interesting, and that a lot of people in this space have been leading, which is how do we iterate and expand questions? How do we make sure that how do we turn democracy into something that is vibrant and emergent and creative, really creative, above all. And that means, I think to do that again, it really helps to start by looking back at some very recent cases that we really haven't caught up to in our online tooling and our expectations of our online communities.
Yeah, and the topic you mentioned is that we don't question some of the structures of governance. I think there is a kind of interesting reflection when I was kind of tracing the kind of etymology of the concept of governance, is that in a way that this concept was uncomplicated in a way, like until maybe the last 100 years, because it meant government. And I mean, Colin, you probably can nitpick this at some point, being an historian, and I'm simplifying things, yes, I know, but nevertheless, like there is this sort of a minor conceptual crisis in the last 100 years around the word governance, and then what does it actually mean, and kind of starting to detach from the government to some kind of a larger concept. But in like a lot of the kind of discussion around it often kind of marks on the difficulty of the concept, like that there's some problematics in the concept itself. And I think it's partly actually a reflection of this. We are not questioning governance, and we're learning to question this concept has happened kind of hand by hand as we have started to learn, really started, the emphasis on the word started, to learn to question governance. But we don't have the tools of even for the questioning, or never mind going forward from this questioning to constructing, or those tools are quite sparse yet.
Well, just the historical point there. I've been reading back again to Alexis de Tocqueville, who chronicled what he saw of early democracy in the U.S. in the 1830s, and saw so clearly that civic associations were the root of any success he was seeing in democratic government. So he really made that connection. I wish I had better conceptual tools for mapping those connections, but
Me too,
I'm running on that hypothesis that there is a connection. Another example of this that I'm thinking of, especially in our kind of populist and kind of dangerously authoritarian moment, is in the 1890s, leaders of a kind of third political party that was forming in the U.S., the Populist Party, which ended up getting merged into the Democratic Party. They had this deep recognition that they were vulnerable to demagoguery, right? Yeah. To strong men showing up and take control, and their response to that was that they were forming among especially farmers, also and workers. And their response to that was always empowerment of the communities, and they did this largely through forming farmer cooperatives and labor unions. And their argument was that our best defense against authoritarianism is not necessarily like a liberal political structure. It's in like day-to-day experience that people might have of self-governing, and I think that's. I'm running on that hypothesis right now that maybe the most powerful thing we can do about like democracy in our broader world is like is the texture of everyday interaction. Yeah, and that in itself is the one element that would increase the literacy of our organization, like our tools that we carry, whether they're conceptual or other. Like if there is this day-to-day practice of governance, it's also the natural development of that literacy, which I think would be a key factor. So yeah, well said, thanks. So what about Colin, Primavera? What do you think we're missing?
Well, I'll jump in here. I think Nathan's most recent comments have raised an important point. I mean, I think that one of the main things that governance has to deal with is control over assets. I mean, there's a question of how are the assets owned, and what kind of processes, who or what actors in what way have the power to make decisions about the disposal of assets. Yeah. And I think that when we're talking about, we're thinking about the sort of the structure of everyday life. thinking about the way that I guess we could say that we like the power of the weak entrenches itself around their kind of direct control over the reproduction of everyday life, right? I mean, you know, if it's when, you know, think about like marks on enclosures and all of that kind of stuff. It's when you create a population that is that has no access to control over assets that you become vulnerable to all kinds of degradation, right? So and I think that's important, like the way that our culture has, or a way that like a lot of those kind of structures have been dismantled, are wrapped up in a regime of asset accumulation. And I think, like in particular, there is the regime of asset accumulation based around housing equity, like in the United States. My understanding is that things work a little bit differently in Germany in the way that the housing market works. So I don't know about that, you know. But in the United States, I mean, we have the you know, housing equity as this vehicle of wealth accumulation, and as one of like the major assets that people hold, like that forces you into, you know, kind of like nuclear family arrangements, you know, that produce things like, you know, gender divisions of labor and other things like this, you know, but and it's like wrapped up in the houses, and kind of like what I want to put out, you know, unless you design a different way to own the houses, you're going to be trapped into this same logic, right? I mean, you know, so I think, you know, so that's the point I want to make, you know, is that governance really needs to think about, you know, how are assets owned? How are decisions made about how to dispose of, you know, like expensive things like land and houses and stuff like that?
Yeah, that kind of outlines this sort of that when we organize, there's always this organizational groundwork underneath us, which is, for example, concepts of ownership and the practical operation of ownership, or ownership of particular things, like houses. Like all of those elements are kind of groundwork that we have to stand upon even when we are organizing, and they will affect not just our thinking but also our designs in and of themselves. Like ownership is a really interesting, like a basic operational tool of organization, like, because it's an organizational question. It's like organization is the tool to create something like ownership, but it's this weird convention that is kind of completely synthetic, and it's often kind of a muddy synthetic form where you don't actually quite or not quite capable of analyzing what are the elements of that belong to your ownership. Like owning a house is different than owning a car, and yes, there is the law, but there's a lot of things that you just assume that are part of this weird convention and ritual of owning things. And how much effect that has on the organization is an interesting topic in itself. But I would turn to Primavera, and then after that I'll open the questions on the floor. But I want to give Primavera the chance to speak if she so wishes. So what do you think we're missing in terms of organization and the kind of from our culture, like in our tools, in our literacy of organization? What are we missing from your point of view?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a hard question, because actually I think we don't really know what we're missing, and that's maybe what we're missing. It's kind of like a meta answer, but to me, like I think we lack a space in which we can more easily experiment with a variety of different organizational structure and governance structure. And in some way, like, you know, it's like until you don't know what you're looking for, it's then hard to know that you're missing it, you know? And I think like there is this general discomfort, or there's a general understanding that we're not fully satisfied with the current model. And to me, you know, like it's I mean, it's easy to see what is wrong about the current organizational structure, and it's a little bit harder to try and think about how we can actually fix it. But it's even more difficult to actually just think into a completely different framework, right? And like not trying to fix what is there, but actually trying to conceive something different. And to me, like, we need more spaces. And
agreed, yeah.
You know, and that's where like the digital world and the blockchain space and all those things are very interesting, because somehow they give us a ground, like a sandbox for experimenting with things that actually do not need to be attached with the existing frameworks. You know, and I think like the blockchain space is fascinating because of that, because all of a sudden it is possible to think things from scratch. And at the same time, of course, there is the very big problematic thing that when you start thinking things from scratch, you just start doing exactly the same mistake as before. So to me, like what we need, I mean, what we miss, I think, and I don't have like the specific answer, but I can answer in the meta level, is like, I think we need spaces in which we can experiment, and yet where we actually have like connection between those innovators, those people that are trying to start things new, and the people that actually have been thinking about organization and governance for hundreds of years, and that actually have all the insights and all the previous failures, so that we don't have to start from scratch, right? So I think on the one hand, there is like this bridge that is missing, because the people that are actually trying to design those new organizational structures do not want to have anything to do with the legacy world. And so in some way, they are just like repeating and replicating all the mistakes. And we could actually move forward much better and faster if there was bridges being built between those different groups. But yet, I think to me the most important thing is like, where are those spaces of experimentation, and how can we actually leverage people, like all those people that actually want to see institutional innovation, to coalesce in a particular space to actually do those experimentation, right? And the blockchain space is fascinating because of that. I think like virtual environment, like virtual games are also fascinating because of that. And I think we need to promote more of those spaces, but we need to make sure that those spaces are not autonomous, are not, you know, separating themselves from the real world, but actually connect with people from the real world, from the legacy system, so that they can actually innovate in a way that is well informed from all the previous ways in which people have tried to innovate and failed. And you know, how do we actually, like, I mean, if you look at the decentralized organization space, I think it's like, it's fascinating the innovation that is happening, but it's also fascinating how little care and how little like desire there is to actually look at what has been done before, you know? And to me, that's actually what's missing. It's I think we are lacking an amazing opportunity because those groups of innovators are not properly accounting or taking into account of what was done and why things failed or why things succeeded, so as to innovate beyond that.
Yeah, I do think like this quality of whether it's blockchain or anything around it, as a kind of laboratory or playground where we can face and really experiment with the organization. It is an important quality. Of course, it's not only it. There are other fields that can do this, but nevertheless, it's something that I think is quite vital in a situation where I think we face a crisis of organization in society in so many levels, whether it's nations and their structures or finance. Like, there are so many problematic elements to our organization that the experimentation is quite sorely needed. But now is the moment that often happens in these kind of rituals, and that moment is turning the questions to the floor. The floor kind of has been open, but now let's make a push towards the floor. Anybody with a question? Do we have a mic? So just a second, you will hear the voice. I don't think there is a mobile camera, so you will only go by voice. But yes, Ruby.
Hello, thank you very much for great contributions. Yeah, my name is Ruby, and I have been active in the development of a time bank and of a food cooperative here in Helsinki. So I had some questions, and they're basically to all of you. First of all, Ella, would be nice to hear from you. What is actually happening there in the supermarket? I mean, who is coming there? What are you actually doing there? And actually also the question that why is it called a supermarket? But I'll leave that to you to answer. And then actually, Colin, I was thinking, one of the things that are sometimes struggling with is the fact that as a practitioner, you're not recognized as the knowledge maker, right? So then comes the researcher who is following what the practitioners are doing, and they get the right to talk about things in terms of it being knowledge. Sometimes it's empowering. Sometimes it's not empowering at all. So I was just wondering if you know, the tokens you're thinking of, or that you're using, what kind of comment would you have to me about that? And then I had another comment, or yeah, having a question as well. Nathan and Primavera, you actually also connected to that what is missing? And you mentioned the farmers, Nathan, which of course was an encouragement to me. And you were saying that it is in those day-to-day practices that we find governance, and that actually there is where governance is happening. And that then made me think of the fact what is missing is actually an acknowledgement that it is in those day-to-day processes of governance, which are often seen as some sort of muddling away of some hippies who are going around thinking that they can change something and are trying to do foolish things on their food cooperatives and with their pumpkins and things like that. But that actually it is not acknowledged that that is the place where real systemic change should be rooted in. And I think that is something what is missing. And I think that sometimes if we want to gaming, I understand very much how it can be fun and it can be, but I think it's very important to put on the table that there are people doing this kind of stuff every day out there, and that it matters for people to join, because this is one big thing that is then also missing. If we don't believe that that is where change is rooted in society, in that day-to-day hippieing around, we don't get people to participate. And this is both an issue, for instance, with a time bank or with a food cooperative. We cannot realize our potential, so that was just...
Yeah, just to introduce Ruby, who has been with us for the 2 days, and she's working in a food cooperative, actually a farm, and also time bank.
So anybody who wants to answer can answer, or then I think Axel will jump in with the question.
Okay. Yeah, I can respond to the question that was addressed to me. So the question was about the problem of the academy kind of promoting people whose job it is to represent others who are who they maybe ventriloquize, who they kind of speak for, perhaps unjustly. Yeah, I mean, I think that part of that dynamic is created by just the fact that the university has an institution that certifies who is and who isn't a researcher, and you have to go get a PhD, and that's kind of a big waste of a decade sometimes. So if you're actually doing the stuff, you don't necessarily want to go get the PhD. And I think that this structure of kind of having a zero barrier to entry economy. I mean, if you have skills, knowledge, and people want to sign up for your class and listen to you talk about what you know, you can issue a credit. I mean, so there's no institutional difference between researchers and those that they represent or talk about. I mean, you still have to. It takes work to teach a seminar. I mean, which is necessarily work that is not doing other things, not doing the things that you are perhaps teaching about. But that difference between, you know, theory and praxis doesn't have to be reified in by credentials. And so, yeah, I mean, I would hope that, you know, in this kind of structure that I'm envisioning would encourage people to sort of just to teach one-off seminars, you know, about things that they know about how to organize or other things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that definitely is part of the impetus for the project.
Yeah, I can also ask the question that was asked for me. So first of all, yeah, we are called Supermarkt because we are based in an abandoned grocery store. So that's very easy. We just, you know, took the name. That saved a lot of hours from brainstorming for fancy names. So we are existing since 10 years, and yeah, we just stuck with the name. And yeah, what's actually going on at Supermarkt? Supermarkt is a really strange space because it's self-financed, self-curated. There is no organization or institution actually behind it. It's a collective of people that run Supermarkt. And every now and then we get project funds that allow us to engage deeper into research, or we are commissioned with writing, for instance, analysis paper. We have some income with events, conferences, workshops, learning journeys around DAOs, governance, platform co-ops. And we have some revenue streams coming in through our consultancy work with emerging platform co-ops. Needless to say that they are the least ones working with big budgets. But yeah, with the help of different funds, also from the Ministry of Economy lately, we managed to sort of offer some sort of really very, very basic incubation program for platform co-ops. And what we basically do is to help envisioning these organizations a form of organizing that really works for them. And very often it has to do with legal frameworks that needs to be tweaked because within the existing institutional frameworks or economic legal frameworks we are operating, it's sometimes impossible to really implement a specific business model. So it's really about hacking and tweaking what is, and also encouraging people to do so, because we need these institutions, right? We need food co-ops, we need alternatives to local food delivery services. And there are groups and collectives working on that field. And what we're trying to do first and foremost is to work with these organizations, try to encourage them, help with business plan, help with fundraising, getting them in touch with different other stakeholders here in the city, but also with other platform co-ops. We closely work with the International Platform Co-operatives and Consortium, and also many other partners in Europe. And yeah, we just hope to be able to continue our work because especially now in Corona, it's becoming quite difficult and precarious at times. But yeah, just we try to continue as long and good as we can.
So we have another question. It's Harry.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Harry, and it was mentioned that or the markets were mentioned there when I guess it was about governing the value of, can't remember what it was, and I would be delighted to if that is more maybe elaborated a little bit. That I was thinking, what are the markets for? Is it, are we thinking about free market of everything, or what is moving on the market? Is it like, is it a contract, a social contract, or contract between two organizations? Is that a market? And well, something along these lines. I think you peaked it, but would be nice to hear more.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for that. We could also ask about who are our target groups, right? Who are the people for whom cooperatives are producing things? It's a really good question with the market because, you know, I think what we currently see is probably a development of several different forms of markets. So there is not just this one market. There's certainly a local market, and that's becoming more and more necessary also to really guarantee delivery of food and access to healthy regional food. And I can imagine that local food production will become a prime resource in the near future. And so there's a market for that, but this is very local and it's not tied to the free market or to the global market. So just one example, I see different markets developing, and it's really it's interesting how different they operate, because they are not alike, right? So if we for instance, if we envision a local market, then it can entirely run on complementary currencies, for instance, because then the players are in a same neighborhood, for instance, and they can really agree on the value production they want to engage with. I think, yeah, maybe Colin or others want to jump in as well, because I find it a bit difficult to really specify all the different markets out there. But there certainly is also a market of people that are ready to really engage with fair products, cooperatively produced products, and that are even ready to maybe pay a higher price for that. Then there is also a market for people that feel ready to maybe not paying a bigger price, but to engaging in, let's say, a fairer terms of production. Just as an example, look at Resonate Music Streaming Collective, which it's an emerging alternative to Spotify or Apple Music, because musicians and fans both co-own the platform. We get to hear music that are not part of the daily rotation on radios, plus musicians get a fair share of every download. So it's really interesting, and there is a growing number of people being ready to support projects like that. I'm not sure if I would call them a market, but it's certainly something that is emerging. So yeah, maybe other opinions or ideas about markets. It's a great question. I don't know, Colin, what do you think about it?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about markets. Some of I think are maybe too technical for this setting. I think in general, I mean, when we're thinking about markets, the most important fact about a market is that a market offers the option to transact on demand. So, like, what I mean by this is that if I have money and I want to buy something, or if I have something and I want to sell it, the market is what has to exist in order for me to be able to do that when I want to, right? So there's all kinds of exchange that might happen that isn't market exchange, because you find people, who wants each side of the transaction, but a market is something that enables asymmetrical demands to transact to be accommodated. So in my work, I write about the dealer market and the way that the dealer market creates liquidity. But the long story short is that we often think about markets as an abstraction away from barter, right? I mean, we think about markets as mediating barter, as being sort of derived from barter. And I think it's important to understand about markets is that markets had to be made, and that there is a price to make the market, and that somebody, this price has to be paid by somebody to somebody else, and that's the question that needs to be asked when you're thinking about markets. Is basically who is making the market? Who, in other words, what entity is standing ready to meet demands to transact, right? So what entity exists such that it will sell you something if you want to buy it, and it will buy something if you want to sell it. And what is the price of that, and who is it being paid to, and by whom? So that would be, I think, what I would say. If you want to think about markets, like, start there, right? Start with liquidity. Where's the liquidity of the market? Who's producing it, and what's the price of it?
Yep. Akseli?
Yeah, hey, thank you for the excellent session so far. really great contributions, which kind of resonate very, very deeply in what we are trying to do in EXA too. And this kind of the question I was thinking is that, I mean, Pekko, like we've been experimenting with our own organization and governance too.
Yes.
To the point that we've been this close to collapse, like
Yes.
just to saved by the bell, luck in the end. And I would like to ask both of you, and okay, now Nathan and Primavera went, but like, what is the most shameful kind of failure of organization or governance you've done?
Anybody? Who's the brave one who starts?
Okay. Oh my God. That's a very tricky one. Okay, I'll try anyways. Because we're here to fully disclose, right? In order to share our learnings. Yeah, to be honest, I think I've had a major failure that haunted me for years. But then again, I also don't know, whether I can really classify it as a failure. But so I was part of a project that was about it was about creating a sister organization for an already existing crypto cooperative in the US and creating a sister organization here in Berlin. And it should also take on the form of a cooperative. And I took on this job, which in itself was an impossible mission, but I only found out when I was right into it. And I think the really big failure was that I did not really look properly into the task. I just moved ahead in a very optimistic manner, and then encountered all sorts of difficulties and issues. And I realized that I would probably, I have a set of standards that I have created of this project where I'm convinced it's only possible to work on the governance of an organization if that organization has at least a tiny core of values and a functioning communication. And if that is not the case, any governance you would like to create on top is bound to fail, because there's just not any basis to build on. And I knew it, but I sort of hoped the technicalities of blockchain technologies and Cody's law would somehow solve it, but of course it didn't. So it failed. It cost me a lot of time and money, and maybe also reputation here and there, but also probably was really necessary for me to fully understand where the challenges lie in projects like that.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Colin, would you like to engage this brave endeavor?
I don't know if I have a good answer for this particular question. I've spent most of my adult life as a graduate student in the university, not really in charge of the organization that I was a part of in any meaningful way. The strike, yeah. Well, I mean, the strike, it was not very successful. I don't know that it was my fault. In part, the ending of the strike was very strange because COVID came along and basically ended the strike. So I mean, essentially, we'd been on strike for 2 months, and the other UCs were beginning to start to strike. Basically, Berkeley was going to strike, and if Berkeley and UCLA had started striking, then they would have. They don't care about Santa Cruz, but they care about Berkeley. But basically, the day that Berkeley called the strike was the day that they were like, oh, COVID is, everything's offline, and that really killed the strike. Because you can't occupy campus and prevent people from coming to campus if campus isn't being inhabited. So I mean, was it an organizational problem? I don't think that the problem with the strike was a problem of organization. I think the problem was a problem of just lacking leverage, of basically like, I mean the question, you come to the university and you say, well, you're not paying us enough. You need us, and the university kind of responded by saying, no, I mean, we don't actually need you. I mean, so I don't know that it was a problem of like organization, but I can't really claim to be the one who did most of the organizing on the strike. I left that to others. So I don't know. It's my flaw, my failures of organizing.
Well,
I've gotten.
You have time.
I've made a lot of enemies in graduate school by speaking my mind too much. That's probably my. I don't know. Yeah, if you're going to organize, sometimes you got to not say what you're thinking. That's a lesson I've learned.
Yeah, I mean, you have time to fail in the future, so that's always, always
thanks. I'll come back in a decade with a better failure story.
Yeah, with an answer. Any other questions from the vast hall? If not, I have one, let's say a final one, once again for everybody. And that question is, what would you like to add? So what is something that is missing from this conversation that you would like to add to this topic? And I make an exception here and go first and give an example from my side, what I would like to add to the topic of experiments in governance. For me, this session is a good example of how what we call economy and what we call governance or organization behave like two sides of the same coin like structure, or two perspectives to the same sculpture. That is, once we start thinking about governance, we come to questions of market, or we come to questions of ownership, which is elementary then to an economic element. And this, one could also say that they are a pair that walks hand in hand, but I do think they're even closer. I think they're inseparable. They are part of the same body. They do have a different emphasis. I like the sculpture metaphor because they do have a different contourings in and of themselves, but ultimately join in the same body, governance and economy. And like all of these topics, all of the reflections here are a good series of examples of this particular feature that I would like to add. But what about you, Colin, Ella? What would you like to add to this session as a final piece from your side?
Maybe, a very practical thing. So I've been engaging in a work group, in an online work group. It's called DGAF. It's existing since 1.5 years. And we had physical meetings in Berlin. And what we do is to look into specific projects, examples of governance at legal frameworks. And it's just an ongoing learning. I really think that we need to increase our literacy on what governance can be and experience it firsthand from projects. So for me, it's a great opportunity to continue learning about it. There are online resources, there is a Telegram channel, there are community calls led by really brilliant people who engage deeply with DAOs and other forms of community decision-making online, blockchain, but also non-blockchain projects. Yeah, and I just want to encourage people that want to go dive deeper into the topic and get develop a deeper understanding to follow that. And what I hope for is that there won't be one single definition of what governance is or can be, but many different viewpoints and influences from people working on it on many different levels, so that we can increase what needs to be known, or so we can just increase the skills and the best practice projects around it.
Thanks.
Okay.
Colin.
Okay. I guess kind of. What I would say is I think in thinking about governance it was useful to think about. I think it's useful to examine like the history of the law and the legal system itself, and I think what matters about that is that the law is always retrospectively trying to deal with particularities, right? So I mean, so I kind of what as Ella, as you've been saying, I mean, so that, there's many kinds of governance, I mean, there's so here we have, we have an abstract idea of like complicatedness and all, and I think that like the way to not get mired in that problem is like to think about just highly specific concrete details. I mean, it's just like the law is always, like I love like reading, if you read like about like, rabbinic Judaism and like the 4th and 5th century and stuff, and what matters is the case, right? I mean, there's the law that happens, but it's like, what if my neighbor's chicken like, poops on my, like what happens then, right? And the history of the law is really just a history of if-then statements, right? So like the oldest law codes are just if-then, right? If this happens, then this happens, and it's not governed by abstract principles. I mean, like type markets or democracy. Okay, fine, but like if this happens, then this happens. Yeah. If this happens, then this happens, right? Yeah. And I think that's like it's good to try to stay anchored in that way of thinking.
I mean, it is a code. And like, of course, there are differences to coding languages or programming languages, but law behaved like a way of coding society. I think it's a valid point to look when it came in, and that was one of its great transformations that it created. So, but we are arriving at the end. We have like, official time, we apparently have 5 minutes still, but I'm also like, I'm not picky about that you have to spend the allocated time completely and you owe us 5 minutes. This is not my style of approaching situations. So in this sense, like I'm ready to kind of finish with this and thank you and thank everybody also in this spiffy hall we have been having, and of course, as nowadays one has to, I would thank everybody in the online, also in the future, if such people come in, they can consider themselves thanked in the future.
And thank you, Pekko, for asking.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks, Akseli and Minna and everyone for organizing. Great job.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Colin.
So, yes, on my behalf, I would really love to invite everybody on stage who's been involved, maybe everybody who was here today even. But thanks to Pekko and Akseli for collaboration and wonderful hosting. Yeah, come here. Ida and Sofia for stage management with me, including the online stage. Harry, Vienne and Timo is not present. Vienne and Timo are our artists for this program. And Harry and Anna were collaborating on the wonderful money primer. Then Kalle and Eero are upstairs, and with them Emmi has been producing the stream. I guess you can't come very easily from up there. And Ruby has been very wonderful participant in the workshop and in all kinds of discussions. So then we still have people who are not here but who have been contributing very much, and that's Daniel, the graphic designer, and Ville, the web designer. Did I forget somebody? I think it's mostly that, and really looking forward also hopefully visiting Berlin and Ella's MoneyLab. So let's take the work further.
Yeah, it would be lovely to see you all in Berlin.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I will press the end button.
Yes.
These things end.
Bye.
Bye.